On Friday of July 19th, just after midnight, the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike pushed an update to millions of Windows PCs. It was a small, routine change to the configuration of security software that, if everything went smoothly, nobody would even notice. Approximately 30 minutes after the update was pushed, somebody at CrowdStrike did notice. Their routine change had caused an endless boot loop, rendering customer systems inoperable. By the time a new update was pushed, the defective configuration file had been live for 79 minutes, like some unattended blowtorch blasting the world economy. Nearly 10 million machines were affected. Financial institutions, airlines, emergency services such as 911, and perhaps most painfully, Starbucks mobile ordering were disabled. Companies suffered billions of dollars in damage. Real human lives were put at risk when hospitals couldn't access their patient records, and getting a coffee was a lot less convenient. The full consequences of this failure by CrowdStrike to vet their updates have yet to be felt. And while 99% of affected computers have been restored, some continue to be down. Reports indicate that in one case, as many as 20,000 computers in just a single company had to be manually restored by IT staff. The U.S. Congress has requested that CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz testify on the failure. Investors have sued the company for its negligence, and government bodies have floated investigations into CrowdStrike's business practices. All of this because of one click. Today, we're sitting down with James Bach and his son, Oliver Bach, world renowned software tester and testing coach, to talk about what happened at CrowdStrike, how it could have been avoided, and why it is inevitable that QA failures on this scale will happen again. So, thank you for joining us.
I'm
Now, and
I'm just here to ask critical questions. You
You
know,
just asking questions? Is that what you're
that's
saying?
right. I'm just asking
You're just
questions.
asking questions.
I'm here to play devil's advocate. I'm here to be a skeptic. I'm here to
All
be a
right.
skeptic.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself? What say? My name is Oliver Bach. I like what? What is your thing, Oliver?
Okay, so my name's Oliver Bach. I work as an author. I write things for a living. Um, I like to garden, and I like to talk to my dad. I have for my entire life been raised as a philosopher, as a skeptic. There is nothing in my life that I'm not inherently skeptical about, and I take a lot of interest in reading about uh, tech news, political news. I like reading about how the corporate machine operates and how it affects people and how the decisions at every level in corporate governance, uh, political governance, the civic world, how that all works. So when I am reading things about CrowdStrike failing, I'm thinking to myself in my worldview that we put regular, unqualified people in charge of enormously important systems. I don't think the CEO of CrowdStrike has any qualifications to be leading a company of its type. I don't think he's an engineer. I think the last company that he was leading also had a famous issue. It was like McAfee. Wasn't McAfee. It was another security service that had a similar bug happen with it that caused crashes. I think that it's interesting that these sort of people are the ones who are deciding how much support the actual architects get, and I think it sounds it's almost Homer Simpson-ish to me. It's relatable to me. When I see a failure like this in the world, I think, man, it's like my neighbor Joe Schmo. was just given the keys to every computer in the world and screwed it up. Of course he screwed it up. Why wouldn't he screw it up? He's just some guy. So I feel kind of a interesting empathy with that.
What is CrowdStrike in regards to like the software landscape? Can you just give us like a rundown for people who might not know what CrowdStrike is?
CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company, and they work mainly with very large organizations that have a lot of computers. And every computer in a large organization is a potential open window where cyber criminals can climb in and steal all the gold. So CrowdStrike installs software on every single computer for each of its clients, and this software sits at a very deep level of each system and watches what happens and looks for various suspicious patterns. It's kind of like a little burglar alarm on every single window in a skyscraper at the headquarters of an international company. It's that kind of thing.
So when you have a cybersecurity company of this magnitude go down like this, I mean, it's pretty bad that this wasn't more well vetted, right? Do they have QA
Yeah.
testers? Do you know?
Uh, yes, they say they do, and I believe them. Uh, sure, they have testers. Do they have enough testers? That is one critical question. And another critical question would be, have they tied up their testers and taped their mouths shut and shoved them in a
Mm,
closet? And then they say, yes, we have testers. Whenever international inspectors come around,
yeah,
they bring them out of the closets and take the tape off and
yeah.
give them a bowl of soup,
Do
cold
those
soup.
testers have any power? Is like really the issue. Look at Boeing. They had quality assurance people who pointed out issues and they were told to shut up. Don't make waves. Don't don't write down what's happening.
Yeah, and in the case of the Titan submersible that imploded, they fired the tester who told them that it was going to implode and
Yeah.
needed more testing. They just fired the guy. Shut up.
Hmm.
So if like your software testers were maybe allowed more time to speak and actually go over this code, this could have been prevented.
Yes, but it's there's lots of things that you could technically say could have prevented it. Here's something that could have prevented it. They could never have gone into business. They could say, it's just a crazy idea to try to do this. Let's not. It's too hard. And then corporate companies can say, it's just too dangerous to have computers. Let's go back to pencil and paper. There's a certain amount of risk that companies are automatically taking on by even trying to do something difficult. So I don't want to be too glib about it and say, oh, if only they had more testers, or if only they had better testers. However, there are a few things we can say from the report that CrowdStrike itself produced that I've reviewed, which is their story of what happened. If we accept everything that they said as true, then there are some conclusions or some problems that we can clearly see. So I'd like to talk about those.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, just for somebody who might not have access to the report, or if they opened it, might not even be able to read it, like myself, what were some of the problems that you first saw?
Well, what CrowdStrike said is that they pushed an update that is should have been a routine update, a block of data that they sent to all these millions of computers, and there was a problem in this block of data that caused the computers to go into an endless boot loop. And it doesn't really matter what kind of problem it was, uh, but it sort of does, because the problem that happened is every single byte in every single piece of data in this update was a zero. It was just like a blank update. So
Mm.
it doesn't take exotic software testing to spot, hey, everything's zero. It's like a delivery truck going out. Are we sure everything's fine? Yeah, except the truck's empty. Is it supposed to be empty at the beginning of our delivery run or at the end? So
So hold on. So if it was all zeros, are what I'm looking at right now is the report from CrowdStrike,
yeah,
where they are saying that the update was tested. They're not just saying that they validated it. They are saying they're using the word tested. But what you're saying is if anyone had even looked at the values in the update, it would have obviously been wrong.
yeah, the whole thing was a bunch of zeros. So it was completely and obviously wrong. And what they said in their report is that they ran a quote validation tool on it and that there was a bug in the validation tool that prevented them seeing this problem. Now, what you might do is say, oh, well, so obviously you need to fix that bug. So the problem is there was a bug in your validation tool, so you should fix that bug. But I would back up and say, wait a minute, why did they trust this validation tool in the first place? Who decided that it had been tested itself to enough of a degree? So if you notice in that report, Oliver, they
Hmm.
don't mention anything they did to test the validation tool.
No, they don't. They just say manual testing.
If I no, they said they ran a validation tool.
Right, but they don't. Well, you're right that they don't talk about what they did. They said they use a content configuration system, which includes the content validator, and they don't talk about the testing of that.
Right,
But they insist
right.
elsewhere that manual testing is somehow involved in their
Yeah, they
process.
say that they in their report they talk about two things. They
Right.
talk about testing their main system, which
Yes.
takes these updates, and then they talk about testing the updates. And
Yeah, I
those are
think
two different things.
I agree. I think including that in this report is kind of confusing and obfuscating because they lead with the we do
I think
this rigorous testing and then we
right,
don't test any of the stuff that caused the problem.
right. There's a reason why they did that. Here's what see, there's stuff that I can't know because I'm just reading their report. But there is stuff that I can say based on being in the business for 41 years, which I have been in the business for 41 years. And here's what happens when someone writes a report like this. Management tells them, okay, we have to tell everybody why this happened, and we want to make sure that every good thing that we did is mentioned, okay? So they're going to say every single thing that they did that anyone could possibly see as good. So that means it's important to look at what they said. It's important to check whether what they said is actually connected to the thing, because they might go like,
Yeah.
and we have a wonderful corporate fitness policy. Okay, but
Yes.
that may not be related to this problem. So they told you in that report all about how they test their main system, which is not really relevant to this problem, but they
Yeah.
want to say it because they want to say, look, we take testing seriously. Well, okay, they take testing seriously of their main system. That begs the question of, did you take testing seriously for the updates? But they do want to let us know, and it's reasonable for them to tell us what generally they do for testing. It's in that context that they mention manual testing was
Yes.
part of what they do.
One mention of it.
So
Yeah,
essentially, what you're saying is that they have testers testing their validation system, but didn't have a tester actually look at the update before it went through the validation system. Wouldn't it make sense to have both?
No, not exactly right. It's not the validation system that they're. We don't know anything about how the validation system itself was tested. They didn't specifically say that. They said that their main system, their Falcon sensor product, which takes these updates and does all the work, they told us something about how they tested that. Then they said that the updates are run through this validator tool, but we haven't been told how that validator tool itself was tested. Maybe it was tested according to how they test the main system. We don't know. So we my point is, if they had a validator system, this is the system that failed, the system that they said had a bug in it. If they had tested that up and down and unto the halls of heaven, they would be crowing about it. They would say, we did formal validation, we did mathematical proofs, this was the most heavily tested validator of updates ever known to humankind. Instead, they tell us nothing about it, which means that it was probably written by Joe Schmo on his lunch hour and held together uh, by some baling wire and blue tape and maybe some rope that glows in the dark. So uh, we're not told how that was tested, so it probably wasn't tested in any particular way. Maybe they don't even remember how they tested it. So I'm concerned about that. And if I were Congress, I would ask, okay, tell me how this validator tool was tested. Tell me why you trusted it. And they say in the report one thing about why they trusted it. They said it's because it had worked before, because they had had other updates, and the other updates had gone
I
well.
see that right here. Yes. They say,
Oh,
quote, based on testing performed before the initial deployment of the template type, trust in the checks performed in the content validator and previous successful template instant deployments.
right.
These instances were deployed in production. It worked before.
Yeah. And you know what else? Who else made that same argument? NASA, just before both of the shuttles blew up.
Yeah.
They said the same thing. Like, we had successful shuttle launches, so people relaxed and they thought maybe this risk isn't as big as we thought. And then, oh, I guess it was because it blew up. So just having a handful of successes is not a responsible basis on which to trust software. And that's what testers know. Now, if you have testers who are fully staffed, fully trained, fully committed, and they are fully supported to get the job done, then they still can make a mistake. They still can miss a bug. But I want you to notice that in the CrowdStrike report, they say nothing about staffing. They say nothing about management. They have a list of a bunch of things that they're going to do better. They don't mention management at all. They don't say, oh, you know what? Management, we're going to start having some meetings with people about checking in with them to see, are you overstressed? Are you overburdened? Is it possible that you could be missing something? Because the measures that they say in their report that they're going to start doing it to remediate this problem are all things that any reasonably trained person or consultant could have told them they should be doing already. They had
Mhm.
no reason not to know that they should be doing those things. So the question not answered in that report is, why weren't you doing this before? And they don't answer that because they don't like the answer. The answer is, 2 years ago, CrowdStrike had a layoff, and the industry is under a lot of stress. So they're trying to do everything that they need to do to make their profits with the minimum of people.
Mhm.
So they're not, we know I know based on the state of the industry and my experience that they probably had let go of testers in that group and not brought them back. There might still be testers there, but they would be overworked. They'd be overstressed. In order to do this stuff well, you need adequate staffing, you need people who are motivated, you need people who are well supported. You can't you should not approach a situation as incredibly risky as this one. This is very high stakes software development, but with a broken team or an overstressed team. And I think the indicator here is they had an overstressed team, and I know they had an overstressed team not just because of background dynamics. I know it because nothing in their report mentions anything about staffing. If they had anything good to say, if they could say, we have 10 testers continuously
Yeah.
testing our validator tool, what more do you want? But they didn't say word one about that. And that tells me that they had one half-time intern who was maybe testing this once in a while.
Uh, there's some questions I had about the types of testing that they list under how do we prevent this from happening again. You saw the types of testing that they listed?
Yes.
Improved rapid response contact testing by using testing types. I'm not familiar with these testing types, so I'm gonna go. I want to go through them with you.
Yes.
Local developer testing. What does this mean?
That means that apparently they think that the developer who created the update didn't look at it very much before he sent it on. Like maybe didn't look at it enough. Maybe he just looked at the first 3 bytes of it and saw it 0, 0, 0. Well, what are the chances they're all zeros? There's no chance of that. So they're saying that the person who created the update should take a little more time and effort to test it himself before anyone else
That's
tests
right.
it. That's what they're saying.
As far as I can tell, the updates for a system like this are supposed to be against like 0 day maximum threat attacks from nation state actors. And what CrowdStrike is saying here, at least my perspective of it to their staff, is shouldn't you guys be trying a little harder? I mean, you're
Yeah,
sending these updates out every single week. Like,
yeah.
shouldn't you
This
try a
is
little
a
harder personally?
this is a little like a Saturday Night Live commercial where it's like you want that Boeing commercial on Saturday Night Live where they say we commit to putting in more bolts, uh, at
More
least as
bolts on your
many that are
doors.
as are needed.
That's right. The minimum requirement for bolt.
We will meet the minimum required bolts in the holes. At least one bolt per hole. We
Right.
commit. I mean,
Right.
it's
Okay.
like, yeah,
So the second one is content update and rollback testing.
right. Content update and rollback testing is just a that's just a blanket term for you know what we should test this stuff.
That's what I was
But
thinking.
rollback testing means let's put through updates that we know will kill things, and let's see if how long it takes us to recover.
Mm,
So they want to make sure that there are better mechanisms for recovering that don't require people to drive out to the server farm and manually hit buttons
yeah.
to
Okay.
reboot things.
So
So
you
the
don't
third
have
one,
one IT tester turning on 20,000 computers.
yeah,
Right, yes,
yeah,
which takes a while. Delta Airlines was in that situation, and it took them days to get their
yeah,
systems back online. And they
yeah,
just filed a lawsuit for $500 million against CrowdStrike.
yeah. Because it appears to me that this sort of kernel level update was invisible to most of the people who bought this service from CrowdStrike. They didn't actually understand that this was even a possibility for a thing that could happen, right? I think most people who buy this sort of security service don't know how deep a kernel level program is, like how early it is in the startup process. There's a reason you would want that to happen because you want the security to start as soon as possible to get ahead of any sort of malicious actor starting early on in the boot process. But at the same time, I don't think this risk was ever communicated in a CrowdStrike sales pitch. So I understand Delta being a little miffed when all their computers went down for a service they thought they were just paying a subscription for that was supposed to be risk-free.
Yeah.
So the third one here is stress testing, fuzzing, and fault injection. I know what stress testing is. I kind of know what fuzzing is. I've never heard of fault injection.
What do you think fuzzing is?
I've got
Okay.
no clue on most of those
Okay.
things except stress
I
testing.
I guess for fuzzing, I'm mixing in my understanding of what phone freaking is because they sound similar. What do you think about freaking, right?
It's not like phone freaking. No, fuzzing. Once you know what fuzzing is, the word fits very well. Fuzzing means blasting a product with utterly random noise as input to see what will happen. So if phone freaking is playing phone tones over the phone lines in order to trigger certain logic so you get free phone calls, that's phone freaking. Buzzing would be playing white noise at into the phone line to see if you can disrupt the systems and
Sure.
crash all of the phone lines in the world. So fuzzing is a very simple process. It's blasting random inputs. So in this case, fuzzing would simply take the form of creating completely random updates and trying to update
Trying to break it.
CrowdStrike,
Yeah, right.
just totally random noise to see what happens, and you do that 10 million times. You
If
just do that.
I if I were testing this sort of system, that would be the first thing I would do. That would be literally the first thing I would try is to try and break it by feeding it garbage uh, hash
Garbage
codes.
nonsense, yeah.
Um, it is also the first thing a child would try, I think. It is
Yeah,
a very common method of
yeah,
testing.
right. So that's fuzzing.
And what is
What would be the
fault injection? Fault
okay?
injection.
Fault injection is where you intentionally put bugs into your product, and then you do all your tests, and you see if the bugs get found. And it's
Mm,
a way
mm.
it's a way of testing your testing. So an example of fault injection, I suppose, would be if you had a if you had a bunch of security cameras covering a whole big area, you would say, now let's hire a guy to try to sneak in. Let's hire some ninjas to try to sneak in and see if they can find the blind spots in the cameras intentionally. So we don't want to wait until a bad guy does it. We want a good guy to do it. Another kind of fault injection in that situation might be, let's randomly disable 10 of our security cameras and see if we are still secure with the remaining
Yeah,
security cameras. So
yeah.
it's just a way of seeing how good your testing is by intentionally putting bugs in and seeing that the bugs get caught.
Okay. The fourth one, which I think is sort of self-explanatory, but in this case, stability testing.
All they mean is we're gonna do a whole bunch of stuff and see if we can get it into an endless boot loop.
Just the same thing, yeah.
That's all they mean. Yeah.
And then the last one is content interface testing.
I think what that probably is they're saying, when we created this update, we used the tool. And they don't really talk about the tool that they used to create the update. But somehow the tool they used to create the update made it possible to save an empty file. I have a feeling that what the guy did is he like created an empty file ready to put an update into it, and then he got distracted and his cat jumped on his keyboard and he's like dealing with Mr. Fluffs, and while he does that the cat hits the key that says deploy,
Yeah.
and so then this empty file that was supposed to have stuff in it just says, okay, I'm going. And by the time he gets back to his keyboard, and Mr. Fluffs has been put back in his cat bag or whatever the
Right.
cat, it's already too late. So they're saying like, how can we make it so that empty files aren't they don't get put on
Right.
through?
Which makes me brings up another question. Um, I have an idea for why this is possible, but I want to ask you, why do you think this bug was possible?
This bug is possible because CrowdStrike decided to go into business doing this really difficult
Sure,
thing.
sure, of course, of
And, if
course.
it, and because operating systems work the way they work,
Sure, sure, sure.
this is always possible. But what made this problem, it's not that the fact that it was possible, it's the fact that it's inevitable that
Sure.
something like this can happen. What makes this inevitable is when management keeps saying, well, it's like a Jenga game. It's like if you play Jenga, you're familiar with Jenga, right? You play Jenga?
Yeah, you pull
Uh,
You never
the you
played
pull
a
the
Jenga game.
the
I think
pull
I
the
played it
sticks
once.
to see how many you can
I
pull
understand
out
what it is.
before it falls.
Right, you have this thing, and then you pull out something, and you pull out something. So in a game of Jenga, the Jenga tower inevitably falls over. Like it can't not fall over. No one has ever played Jenga and gone like, we removed all the sticks, and yet the tower stands because
Right.
the tower is the sticks. Eventually, you pull the last one, and there's no way. It just has to collapse. So in a Jenga-like fashion, when you do something difficult and risky and everyone's eyes are on it and you want to be very careful, you lavish resources on that. But then when it becomes routine, people start taking profits. They say, well, can we do this cheaper? Can we do this cheaper? Can we do this cheaper? What made this inevitable is the same thing that made the Boeing situation inevitable. It's a little different from the Titan submersible situation because that
Yeah.
guy was crazy.
Yeah.
That guy, even the first thing he did flew up.
Right, right, right.
But it's not like he kept taking stuff out and taking stuff out. He did something in the submersible case where everyone said, you really shouldn't do that. It's probably going to blow up. Um, but you can be successful with something. Like, for instance, an iron bridge. The first iron bridge that was ever created was really big and heavy and very expensive because they put so much iron in it. It was basically an iron tube over a
Yeah.
river. It got super hot in the summer because the sun would beat on it. So then they said, you know what? We can cut big holes in this. We can do this with less iron. And they kept taking more iron out and taking more iron out until the first bridge collapsed while it was being constructed because it wasn't enough iron in it. And then they said, "Oh, well, we took out too much of the metal. Let's put some more metal back in." So they learned what the limits were. They learned what the safety margins were, and they took those safety margins seriously. But what you have in this case, the reason why it was inevitable is management had an incentive to keep putting pressure on the developers and the testers to do more with the same number of people, and they're lulled into a false sense of security because a disaster hasn't happened yet, and they're just going to keep leaning and leaning and leaning until reality strikes back and says Jenga, and the whole thing falls over. I think that's what we're seeing here.
I have a thought about it, and that's something that you taught me about testing when I was very young, and it's one thing that I think about all of the time in my life. It's applicable to almost everything, and I think that's why this is possible and why it happened. If the code that was used in this bug, if this little package of configuration files really was just a bunch of zeros, the reason that the bug happened is because when they were designing the software for this validation check, they never tested a file with a bunch of zeros on it. They just didn't think of it. It didn't occur to them. They thought no one's ever going to put just a bunch of zeros through it. Well, that didn't come through their mind. And it's not really something you would expect to come through a developer's mind when they're working on a product, but it's something that should come to a tester's mind when
Yeah,
they are interacting with a product.
right. Because testers believe in trouble. That's the difference between a tester and a developer. A developer has to believe in quality, believe in success, believe in value. Otherwise, they can't get their work done. But a tester needs to have the opposite belief. They need to believe and have faith that things will go wrong. So you don't need to go to a tester and convince them that zeros can happen. You just suggest it to them and they'll go, yeah, good, we'll try it. Uh, Whereas you go to a developer and say that, and they go, well, how could that ever happen? I'm not going to waste my time with that.
Yeah, no one's going to use it that way. No,
No
that will
one's going
never
to use it that
happen. Will never happen.
Right. And so whenever somebody says no user would do that, no user would put in an empty update, I would say what you meant to say is that no user you can think of who you like would do that on purpose. And that may be true, but someone could do it accidentally. Clearly this was an accidental update. So so somebody did it by accident. No one did it on purpose.
Yeah, of course.
And
Accidents
maybe it was a
accidents
user
happen,
you
right?
don't like. It was Mr. Fluffs on the keyboard hitting the enter key, not our preferred user, a cat on the
Yeah.
keyboard.
Yeah. It's well, the validator obviously existed to check against accidents, against errors that wouldn't work. But it's the very idea of emptiness, right? It's the idea of a file that has nothing in it. It's just not something I think someone who's writing the code would think of off the top of their head to check for. And it's something that a tester would obviously think of because what a tester, at least in my mind, what a tester thinks of are the ways somebody could easily mess this up. Like the first top level is just how could
Yeah.
someone screw it up?
But I want to be clear that a tester might not think of things. Testers make mistakes and forget to cover things, or there's an infinite number of things that you could cover, and you have to
Sure.
make choices. Even if they were fully staffed, even if they were fully supported, bugs can possibly get through. But my issue is not with the fact that it's possible for there to be a problem here. My concern is, did management behave responsibly in the weeks and months before this event to put in place trained people, motivated people, and enough of those people? And then did they give them the right kind of support so that they could do the right kinds of testing? Now, obviously, if they're giving us this laundry list of all this kind of testing that they're darn tootin' gonna do from now on, they couldn't have been
Right.
supporting those testers very well, because any trained tester is going to suggest those things that they suggested in their list.
So, what would be, do you think that this list, if they actually follow it to continue to improve so that this, you know, is unlikely to happen again, or at least, the risk is a little bit lowered. Do you think that it's enough if they actually follow it? What would be your suggestions to CrowdStrike as a tester in the field?
My suggestion is that the list is interesting, but ultimately beside the point. What is the point? What they really need to do is they need to debrief that team, and they need to find out from that team. First of all, if I were to go in there and investigate this, I just ask the team, what happened? Oh, well, we forgot a test. And I would say, why did you forget a test? Why did you forget that particular test? Did you have plenty of time? Did you have plenty of resources? Were you under no stress at all and then you forgot it? Or is it really because you're rushed off your feet, because you haven't received any training, because you have no goals, professional goals about improving yourselves? I mean, what is your personal and professional improvement plan in your group? And if you don't have one, if you have nothing particular that you do to get better at your job over time, that's the point. That's the problem. Management needs to take risk more seriously in this company. That's the problem. Now, I suspect that the pain of all this and the fact that CrowdStrike's stock price has dropped by 40%, um, I suspect that they're going to start taking this stuff more seriously. However, there's a good chance that management in this case will not take a hard look at themselves and what they did to create the conditions for this kind of thing to happen. What I hope they will do is say, we need to create fundamentally better conditions for our people to work in. We need to get them trained. We need to add some people to the staff so we're not so stressed. We need to add new skills into the team. Maybe we need to have some more diversity in the team. That's what they need to be looking at is management and staffing and the support of that staff. Because if you have that, then those people are going to make lists like this on a routine, going to be saying, oh, here are the things we need to do to make this thing better.
So, with the current climate, it seems that a lot of big businesses are kind of laying off their human staff, the people who look at this kind of stuff, in favor of automation or AI. What do you think the likelihood is that CrowdStrike says they're going to do these things, but instead just tries to use AI to try to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, I don't know what the likelihood is. It depends on how comfortable they are with telling lies. But I suspect that they will implement these things that they said they're going to implement. But I do think they're going to continue unless they've had a come to Jesus moment in their minds. I suspect they're going to continue on a very technocratic path rather than looking at their management and human resource um, actors, rather than looking at their people and supporting them. And the reason why I say that is just they didn't mention any of the human side of things in their report. So this is a technocratic response, and it's very easy for technocrats to say that code is the answer to all things. Just write more code. That'll
Yep.
solve. And and what we really need to do in the industry is to break out of that and to push back against people who think that way, because that is not good for society, and it ultimately means that it is inevitable for another one of these kinds of things to happen again, because you'll just have equally unmotivated people, equally under pressure. Now they'll have even more test systems that they have to maintain. Like imagine a juggler, and imagine the juggler has is trying to juggle 6 balls, and they drop one, and so you say, "I have a solution because dropping balls is terrible. We're from now on we will juggle 12 balls. That way, even if we drop one, we'll still have lots more balls left. Uh, um, we'll juggle 12 balls because then people really have to concentrate. So in one sense, you could say, wait a minute, they're saying the solution is they're going to do more work. What they didn't say is they're going to hire more people.
Yeah.
How are you going to do more work if you don't hire more people? That's just heaping on more stuff, and then that means more stuff is not going to get done. If you try to juggle 12 balls, you will drop even more balls. The problem wasn't you weren't juggling enough balls when you dropped that. And the other thing that people say is they'll say, well, we'll make really sure not to drop ball number 6 again because this time we dropped ball number 6. Well, if you try really hard not to drop ball number 6, now ball number 5 is going to be the one that you drop because you haven't fundamentally solved the problem. There's the people doing the work don't have the skills, and there's not enough of them, and they're not supported well enough. That's the fundamental problem.
I agree.
So I'm not saying that if everyone was totally well supported, problems are impossible. Uh, but if you have a robust team and things go wrong and you write a report about it, then you talk a lot about your robust team and how robust
Yeah.
it is, how much work you've put into it.
Yeah.
If the Olympic team, the men's Olympic relay team, gets misses out on first place, misses out on the gold medal, and has a silver medal, you go, well, we weren't good enough, so what can we do to improve? But it's not like a situation where they can't even qualify for the Olympics. And why is that? Well, because we never trained. if if you train super hard using the most modern methods and you lose, that's more like bad luck. You didn't have the last ounce of talent, but you did everything anyone reasonably could have expected you to do. That doesn't mean that you will get success. But if you don't even try and you lose, it's totally different. And
Yeah.
I'm worried that this CrowdStrike situation was more of they weren't seriously trying. Management just didn't give them the support that they.
We don't know what the culture is in the CrowdStrike office, and we don't know if the developers there weren't saying, "Hey, we'd like more time to look at this before we sent it out."
Right, we don't.
There's no answer in this document for the management who
Right.
are now saying, "Oh yeah, we'll start doing all the stuff you thought we were doing already."
Yeah. Well, also the other thing you see that's not in their report is there's no testimony.
Yeah.
So we're not going to hear from the testers and developers who are on the scene. I guarantee you that the testers and developers on that team, if you were to ask them and if they were freed from their confidentiality agreements, I guarantee they know why this happened.
Yeah.
They know they would talk blue streak about we warned management this was going to happen. In fact, I would bet $500 that if the testers and developers could speak freely, somebody would say, I warned them about this. I told them something like this was going to happen, but did they let me replace our old broken validator tool with a super good new one? No, they said there's no money in the budget for that. And so it serves them right.
That seems to
We're
be
not going to
the
see that testimony.
that seems to be the process. I mean, we've seen that with like the Boeing whistleblowers. Almost any kind of whistleblowers. We told them that something was going to happen and they didn't listen. You know.
Yeah, that's normal corporate difficulties. But it's one thing to say, yeah, all companies work that way, but it's different when you run a company that does life-saving surgery,
Yeah.
or which has the ability to create a $5 billion outage, which is what this has been estimated 5.4 billion in losses just for the Fortune 500 companies. That's just that for them. That doesn't count what happened with 911 in New Hampshire. So the entire 911 system for the entire state of New Hampshire went offline for one night. No one could call 911 and expect to get any help. So, how many calls in the entire state of New Hampshire were attempted on that night?
Yeah.
And do we even know if anyone had a heart attack on in the entire state, New Hampshire, and died on that night, who maybe could have lived? And what of the coffee I never received, Oliver?
Yeah.
Not the
That fateful
It's
day?
coffee.
true. The responsibility for something like this is definitely on management for not adequately supporting their team, not adequately staffing their team, surely, and of course not training their team, sending them out to conferences they want to go to, sending them to classes they want to take, you know, doing the things that prepare them to handle any sort of situation. It is important that they do that. It's important that Congress calls in the CEO of CrowdStrike to ask him questions, because what they're doing is at the very base level of booting up a computer. It's starting this computer and it's invisible to an ordinary user. When their computer just starts rebooting over and over again, they have no idea what's happening. IT staff didn't have any idea what was happening at first. It caught them off guard. Um, it's important that I don't want the devs. I'm sure the development team in charge of these operations feels awful about what happened, but they don't deserve the blame. Their bosses deserve the blame. Who controls their funding deserves the blame, right? It's not like CrowdStrike's hurting for money. This is
If
a mission critical system.
the developers are incompetent, if the testers are incompetent, then the problem is the people who put them there, who
Yeah,
should have known they were incompetent and didn't do anything about it.
yeah,
This is a fundamentally a management failure, a structural failure. That's what makes these kinds of problems inevitable.
yeah. Hmm.
Who actually pressed the wrong button at the wrong time, we can debate about, but these kinds of problems in general it's a Jenga dynamic. It's eventually going to happen unless you have somebody looking at the Jenga tower saying, this tower is getting pretty thin, we need to add more things into it instead of constantly taking stuff out of it.
I agree. Yeah.
As somebody who used to work in HR, yeah, I find that a lot of problems start from the top down instead of the other way around.
Your dog agrees?
Yes.
The dog agrees.
Edit
Now, if
that.
I were introducing you, I would say Oliver Bach is an author, a science fiction author of Who Walks with Death, available on Amazon, on
True. It's
Kindle.
true.
Get
It's
those
there.
plugs
It
in.
exists. Plug it.